It's been 10 years since I first set foot in that house. This is the most terrifying experience of my life, and as someone who experiences the strange, unexplained, and the frightening more than the average person, I don't say that lightly. To better explain things, I'll put it this way. I've had quite a few experiences with spirits. I can feel them strongly, and I've always been able to. I can usually tell if they're male or female as well. So when it comes to the supernatural, I am almost completely unfazed. Even so, the trip I took with my closest friends would change everything. It was 2010, and I was visiting what is basically the mecca for fans of my favorite TV show. You see, even though it was filmed in a studio, exterior shots of this house were used in a series as the residence of the main characters. Still, it's private property. You can't just knock on the door and look around. You have to reserve a room there. That's what made my chance to be there so special. I received an invitation through a dear friend of mine, who happens to be a friend of the owner's. There was a big fundraiser there in the form of a Halloween party. A select few people received an invitation and paid the amount of money to stay there for several days. All of the money raised went to help restore the house, so it was for a good cause. The house itself was very old and had an interesting history. It had 3 floors, plus a basement and an attic. Almost every part of the mansion has a story behind it. It was exactly the kind of place I've always dreamed of staying in. Yeah, Halloween in a big old spooky house. Fun, right? Well, it was, for the most part anyway. At this time, I had known my friends for about 7 or 8 years, including my best friend. She's very much one of those stereotypical New Yorkers you see on TV. Sarcasm is her native tongue, and she won't hesitate to call anyone out on their bullshit. She's also a big sci-fi nerd, and one of the smartest people that I know. She's basically the sister I never had. She's also my frequent traveling companion and roommate when we attended conventions. So it was a no-brainer that we'd room together for that week. Nothing could be more natural. What wasn't natural was the very high paranormal activity taking place in the house. These old mansions always seemed to have a ghost or two. Well, at least one on every floor. Most of them didn't bother me. I would even say that I felt comforted by their presence at times. There was a little girl in the attic that tugged on the back of my shirt and spoke to me. There was a man who walked the corridors near the grand staircase who said hello to me and even saved me from falling down the marble staircase. There were spirits that I saw in the basement and near the ballroom who I believed to be the original owner and his wife. They were all harmless. However, in the wing that contained the old servants' quarters, there was a different feel. There was definitely something there. Something dark. The large house seemed full of life, with so many people staying in every room, with the exception being the basement. The larger rooms held 3 to 5 people. For my friend and I, this meant that we would be rooming together in one of the smaller rooms of the house, located in the wing that once held the Help. I didn't mind at all. I was just happy and grateful to even be there. But from the moment I set foot in that room, it felt wrong. It was unnerving. It was like something was staring at me in a predatory manner. My eyes immediately darted towards an empty corner of the room, and I could see a spirit there. It was a male. And though I was staring right back at him, he had the nerve to continue to stare back at me, his eyes scanning my body, looking at me like he was a starving animal. I turned to my friend and muttered, "There's a man staring at me in the corner." She immediately brushed it off. "It's an old house. You're just imagining it." I could almost feel the spirit smirking at me as I put my suitcase in the room and quickly left to go find my other friends and explore the rest of the house. As much as I love my best friend, she wasn't like me. She couldn't see spirits, and she certainly didn't believe in them. I spent the rest of the day with my friends, away from that room. So by the time I came back into the room at night, I had almost forgotten about what happened earlier. At that moment, it was just a small room in an old house, and I was very tired. Even though I usually have trouble sleeping in new places, I fell asleep pretty easily. The next day was spent with more exploration of the house, as well as excursions into the lovely town that had once been a playground for the rich. I was having a lot of fun. The days flew by, and yet here and there, while I was in that room, I often felt that predatory spirit staring me down. I tried to avoid that room as much as possible, which was pretty easy to do, as there was a lot to see and experience. This trip was a dream come true, and before I knew it, the big Halloween party was upon us. That year, the party was held on the night of October 30th, 2 days before I had to return home. Everyone had been eagerly anticipating the party. We couldn't wait to show off our costumes. There would be music and dancing in the ballroom that night, and the majority of us were dressed up as characters from the show. I was wearing this gorgeous historical-style red and cream dress, but the heaviness of the fabric and the layers left me sweating in an unladylike fashion. By the early morning hours of October 31st, with the party dying down, I couldn't wait to get out of my dress and go to bed. I walked down the empty corridor. It was completely silent. I entered our room to see that my friend was totally passed out. She can literally sleep through a hurricane. In fact, I even watched her sleep through Hurricane Sandy a few years after this. I locked the door behind me, simply for the reason that I would be sleeping in the corner closest to the door, and I didn't want to get smacked in the head. My bed consisted of a sleeping bag on an air mattress, while my friend was on a twin-sized bed almost diagonal from me. I was hot and sweaty after climbing the stairs and going down that long dark hallway. My dress was so heavy, all I wanted to do was take it off and put on my nightgown. As I pulled the dress over my head, I got this strange feeling that my friend refers to as my spidey sense. It's a tingling sensation that I get on top of my head when I sense spirits nearby. It was that man in the corner again, staring at me. Of course, he would show up when I was naked and vulnerable. I could feel his eyes on my body, and there was nothing I could do but to cover myself up with my nightgown as quickly as possible. By the time I was done, the spirit was gone. I decided to brush it off and go to bed. I was tired, and we had big plans for today. I turned off the lights, got into my sleeping bag, and turned over to face the wall, and tried to get some sleep. When suddenly, I thought I heard my name being called.
Catherine.
Whoever was in the hallway calling my name could wait till morning, but I heard it again, clearer this time.
Catherine.
But I could not place the voice. Again, I tried to ignore it. Then it came a third time.
Catherine.
There was no knock at the door, and my friend was still sleeping. Just ignore it. They'll go away in a minute when they find the door locked, I'm sure of it. They can probably hear my friend snoring, I thought to myself. The room suddenly became freezing cold. It was my first October on the East Coast. I vaguely recalled someone mentioning that there could be snow that night, so I shrugged it off and burrowed deeper into my sleeping bag. The air in the room almost felt electrified. It was getting harder for me to fall asleep. I then heard from the corner of the room the sound of footsteps. He was there. As I said before, I've had a lot of experience with the supernatural, but I have never felt so terrified. This was unlike anything I had ever experienced. The presence felt so predatory, but even worse, he radiated an aura of pure evil. From my position on the floor, I not only heard his slow, deliberate footsteps coming towards me, but I could feel him as well. He emerged from his empty corner, came around to the side of my air mattress, where he crouched down. I was frozen in fear. A very large male hand covered my mouth, stifling my sobs as he violated me. In my head, I frantically began reciting half-forgotten prayers, chants, and mantras, anything I could think of to get him off of me. I've never been a very religious person, but I was so scared in that moment, I could think of nothing else I could do. I prayed to every god I could think of. Something must have connected, because my attacker suddenly froze and then disappeared. I flung the sleeping bag off of me, jumped up, and turned on the light. No one was there. My friend was still snoring, and the door was locked. I was shaking badly. I ran a hand over my face and discovered that I had been crying from fear. I had to get out of there. I frantically unlocked the door, threw it open, and ran blindly down the dark hallway towards the stairs. I couldn't think beyond getting down to the solarium, where surely someone would still be awake. I came upon two of my friends heading up to bed and began to babble incoherently. I must have looked like a mad person, running down the hallway in my long white nightgown, babbling about a man that wasn't there. They had never seen me so hysterical before, but since they had known me for about 7 years by then, they immediately believed me. They told me I couldn't go back in that room and to come with them. That's when I suddenly realized I was cold, running around in my nightgown. Okay, just let me go get my robe. I slowly walked back down the hallway towards the bedroom, realizing as I approached that the door was now closed. With trepidation, my shaking hand took hold of the doorknob. But it would not turn. It was locked. I knocked on the door and tried to loudly whisper to my friend, but she couldn't hear me over her snoring. I could sense that evil spirit still in the room. Don't ask me how, but somehow I knew. He wanted me to beg him to open the door. There was no way I was going to do that. I turned away to go back with my friends, but they were no longer in that wing of the house, and I had no idea what room they were staying in. They basically ditched me. Not knowing what else to do, I went downstairs to find the lights off in the solarium and a lit fireplace. I knew that they wouldn't leave this fire unattended for long, so I curled up in a ball and waited for them to return. I could see through the windows that it was getting lighter. The sun would be coming up over the ocean soon. I saw movement on the terrace, and a group of guys came stumbling in drunk. After the party, they went walking down by the ocean. There was one that I didn't recognize, and he asked me if I was okay, and the story of what I had just experienced came pouring out. Me and him sat there and talked until the sun came up. I thought he kind of looked like the movie star John Gilbert, and was instantly attracted to him. We even began dating soon after this. But anyways, the sounds of life began to fill the old house again as the people got out of their beds. Later that morning, I relayed this experience to one of my friends, who said that there was somebody a part of the group who was even more sensitive to the paranormal than myself. I talked to this person and asked him if he could come up to my room for a minute. I gave him no details about what happened that morning. We walked to the door of the room, and upon entering, he stared right into the corner with a serious expression on his face. "Catherine, you can't stay here tonight. Get all your stuff and get out. Don't leave anything in here, and never come back to this room. He'll be back for you tonight, and he will attack you." I stood there, mouth agape, completely astonished and horrified. Every hair on my body stood straight up. "Did you not understand what I just told you? Hurry up, get your stuff, and let's go." I glanced over at my best friend's bed. "What about my friend? He's not after her. He wants you." My blood ran cold. I quickly grabbed all of my things, and moved into an empty room across the hall. The last night of my trip, nothing happened, and I flew home the next day. I thought it was over, but the following year I ended up returning to that mansion for the next Halloween party. My boyfriend, the John Gilbert lookalike, had proposed that year, but about a week before the Halloween trip, things fell apart, and we broke up. I ended up going with my best friend, as I had the year before. All of the guests were supposed to stay in the gatehouse that year, but the boiler had gone out, so everyone was moved into the main house. I found out that we had been assigned to the room that I stayed in on my final night last year. I felt safe in that room, even though I knew it was right across the hall from his room. I thought it would be okay, but I was wrong. That night my friend was on the single bed, and I was on the floor again in my sleeping bag on the air mattress. The door was locked, and the room wasn't dark this time. It was lit by a small lamp on the bedside table. Because of what happened the year before, I developed horrible insomnia, and sometimes didn't sleep for days in a row. But I managed to doze off for a while. But something woke me up. All was quiet. Then I felt that familiar tingling. I'm safe in this room. The door's locked, I repeated to myself like a mantra. I then heard movement from across the hall. From where I was on the floor, I could see under the door quite clearly. I couldn't see anyone or anything. Then I heard the footsteps. He knew I was there. He was coming for me. The footsteps came from that corner of the room across the hall, then stopped right in front of my door. There was no one there. I could clearly see an empty space beneath the crack under the door, where a pair of feet should have been. And yet, the doorknob began to rattle. I was barely breathing as I watched the doorknob move faster and faster. And then, it stopped. Then the entire door itself began to rattle and shake. I began to cry and curled into the fetal position, my eyes never leaving the door. I've never felt so helpless. Then, it finally just stopped. There wasn't a sound from the hallway. He was gone. But there was no way in hell I was leaving that room until the sun was up. In the morning I told my friend that I couldn't stay in that room. Hell, I could no longer stay in that wing of the house. I would sleep anywhere, on the couch in front of the fireplace, in the tower room, the attic, the basement, anywhere but in that wing of the house. I ended up sleeping on the couch the following night, but left my suitcase in the room with my friend. In the morning, in the cheery light of day, I ventured to the room to get clean clothes so I could shower. As I approached the door, I saw a strange sight. There was a single red apple on the floor in front of the door to the room. I knew that it was for me. It was a message of some sort. The door to the room was locked, so I knocked, calling my friend's name. She poked her head out from a door down the hallway. "Hey, I thought you were in there." "No, I slept downstairs last night." "Then who locked the door? And is that your apple? It's not mine." She then made a joke about someone leaving me a midnight snack. I laughed, but still made no move to touch the apple. I got the spare key from the owner and opened the door to see all of my clothes and things thrown around the room. I had reached my breaking point, and I couldn't take any more of this. I packed up all of my things and spent the remainder of the trip in the tower room with my friends. It's taken me a long time to be able to even talk about this. I've been back to that house many times, but I've never stayed in that wing again. And even then, I can still feel him there, in the corner of that room, waiting for me in the dark. There's always a reason to be afraid.